The Renaissance. Just hearing the word brings to mind towering cathedrals, vibrant paintings, and revolutionary ideas that changed the course of history. But what really made this era, stretching roughly from the 14th to the 17th century, so earth-shaking? Spoiler alert, it wasn't just about fancy clothes, elaborate hats, or powdered wigs. It was a full-on explosion of human creativity, science, and discovery. This was the time when the world, slowly and sometimes painfully, pulled itself out of the dark, rigid shadows of the Middle Ages and sprinted, sometimes stumbled, into modernity. But how did that happen? And why then? Let's start with where it all kicked off. Italy, and not in some glossy palace or royal court, but in gritty, bustling city-states like Florence, Venice, and Milan. Imagine Florence, a city bustling with noise from crowded streets, marketplaces buzzing with merchants shouting their goods, the sharp scent of fresh paint mixed with the metallic tang of blacksmiths hammering away. This was ground zero for a cultural revolution. Why Florence? Well, money talks. Specifically, the Medici family. They were not just bankers. They were the original power brokers, ruthless politicians, and shameless patrons of the arts. These guys funneled tons of cash into everything, from commissioning stunning artworks to funding universities and scientific endeavors. They turned Florence into an incubator of genius. So, in a way, without the Medicis, we might never have gotten the Renaissance as we know it. And here's a fun fact. The Medicis didn't just bankroll artists for art's sake. They used culture as political power. Supporting a famous artist meant boosting your own prestige and control. So, every painting, sculpture, or book had more behind it than meets the eye. It was part of a larger game of influence and status. This mix of money, power, and culture created the perfect storm for creative explosion. Now, on to art. Forget the stiff, flat, almost cartoonish paintings of the Middle Ages. Renaissance art was vibrant, full of life, and packed with raw emotion. Take Leonardo da Vinci. He wasn't just a painter. The guy was a scientist, an inventor, an anatomist, and a philosopher rolled into one. His Mona Lisa. Yeah, that mysterious smile took years to perfect. Each brushstroke was a perfect blend of art and science, capturing light and shadow in a way no one had seen before. And Michelangelo? The Sistine Chapel ceiling wasn't just a ceiling. It was a human drama, a spectacle of divine and mortal struggle, painted while he lay flat on his back for years, arms aching, paint dripping. Talk about dedication. Imagine the strain, lying there day after day, contorting his body, mixing pigments, and bringing to life scenes from Genesis. The sheer physical and mental endurance required is something most of us can barely imagine. But art wasn't just about individual genius. It also changed the way people saw the world. Perspective was a game changer. Artists figured out how to paint three-dimensional space on flat surfaces, making scenes look real, almost like you could step into the picture. Suddenly, landscapes, faces, and architecture looked natural, not cartoonish. It was a revolution in visual storytelling that gave art new power. And let's not forget the patrons beyond the Medicis. Popes, kings, and nobles all threw their weight behind the arts. Rome, for example, was transformed by popes like Julius II, who commissioned Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel and Raphael to decorate the Vatican. These weren't just religious acts. They were political displays of power, meant to awe the masses and legitimize authority. But art was only one piece of the puzzle. Science was tearing down old beliefs and building new ones. One name stands out here: Nicholas Copernicus. He dared to say something absolutely radical for his time. The Earth wasn't the center of the universe. That heliocentric model, it rocked the foundations of everything people thought they knew about their place in the cosmos. And oh boy, did the church hate that idea. The heliocentric model didn't just rearrange the planets. It challenged centuries of established authority. Imagine living in a world where everything you believed about the cosmos was suddenly questioned. Copernicus's idea was dangerous because it shook the very idea that humans occupied a special place in creation. It was a cosmic wake-up call, but the spark was lit. These ideas spread like wildfire, lighting fires in the minds of people like Galileo Galilei. He grabbed a telescope, pointed it to the heavens, and discovered moons orbiting Jupiter. Proof that the universe was way bigger and stranger than anyone imagined. Can you imagine the guts it took to say that out loud back then? Galileo wasn't just a scientist. He became a symbol of the clash between new knowledge and old power. His trial by the Inquisition is one of history's most famous examples of science confronting authority. Medicine made giant leaps too. Andreas Vesalius was a game changer. He dissected human bodies when it was illegal or taboo to do so. He sketched detailed anatomical charts that shattered centuries-old medical textbooks. Suddenly, doctors knew what was really going on inside the body, not just what ancient philosophers guessed. It's wild to think that before him, much of medicine was guesswork and superstition. And speaking of superstitions, the Renaissance was also when people began to question old medical myths. For example, the idea of humors. The belief that health depended on balancing bodily fluids was still hanging on. Vesalius and others started replacing these ideas with actual observations, laying the groundwork for modern medicine. The shift wasn't smooth. Old beliefs die hard, especially when tied to religion and tradition. And then there's the printing press. Johannes Gutenberg didn't just invent a machine. He unleashed a revolution. Books could now be mass-produced. Ideas spread at lightning speed. No longer locked away in dusty monasteries, knowledge became accessible to anyone who could read. Suddenly, literacy rates soared, and a whole new middle class of thinkers, writers, and activists was born. Think about that. Before the printing press, books were copied by hand. Painstaking, expensive, and rare. Only elites had access. Gutenberg's press changed everything. Suddenly, the Bible, scientific writings, poetry, and philosophy were in the hands of ordinary people. It's hard to overstate how this sparked an intellectual explosion, helping fuel movements like the Reformation and the Scientific Revolution. Politics and philosophy weren't left behind either. Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince stripped away idealism to reveal the gritty, often brutal reality of power. Sometimes cruel, always practical. His ideas still spark debate today. It was a wake-up call for rulers, advising them that sometimes morality had to take a back seat to maintaining power. It wasn't a how to be a bad guy book. It was a brutally honest guide to surviving political chaos. Meanwhile, humanism blossomed, a philosophy that put humans, not divine beings, at the center of the universe. It celebrated potential, reason, and the joy of learning. Thinkers like Erasmus and Petrarch argued that humans could shape their own destinies, improving society through education and critical thinking. This was revolutionary, a clear break from medieval views that saw humans as inherently sinful and powerless without divine intervention. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Beyond the famous names and grand ideas, the Renaissance was full of surprising details that shaped its unique flavor. For starters, fashion. Believe it or not, the Renaissance was a time of wild style experiments. Men wore tights tighter than your smartphone case. Women's dresses had sleeves so heavy they needed help just to lift their arms. Fashion wasn't just about looking good. It was status signaling a form of early self-expression. People wanted to stand out, to show off wealth, power, and taste. Exploration was another huge piece of the puzzle. Christopher Columbus's 1492 voyage wasn't just about discovering new lands. It kick-started globalization with all its messy, complicated, and sometimes brutal consequences. The Renaissance spirit of curiosity and adventure drove explorers like Vasco da Gama and Ferdinand Magellan to map the world in ways no one had dared before. They literally redrew the maps of the known world. Magellan's voyage was a true odyssey, the first to circumnavigate the globe. It wasn't just a triumph of navigation, but a test of human endurance and spirit. His crew faced starvation, mutiny, and unknown seas. When they returned, the world suddenly felt smaller and more connected, forever changing how people saw their place on the planet. Music changed too. New instruments and musical notation allowed composers to create more complex and emotional works. Figures like Josquin des Prez and Giovanni Pierluigi da Palestrina crafted pieces that still stir emotions today, centuries later. Imagine hearing those melodies in grand cathedrals, echoing off stone walls. But let's be real, the Renaissance wasn't all sunshine and progress. It had a dark side. While it glorified human potential, it was also a time of social upheaval, religious wars, and ruthless politics. The same city-states that nurtured genius were playgrounds for deadly rivalries and backstabbing betrayals. Power grabs were brutal, and the consequences often deadly. The Papal States were no exception. While popes commissioned art and built grand churches, some of them also played ruthless political games, allying with mercenary armies or assassinating rivals. The line between spiritual leader and political warlord was often blurry. So, what made the Renaissance truly revolutionary? It was this magical fusion of art, science, and humanism, all fueled by new technologies and ideas that spread faster than ever before. It was an era where curiosity wasn't just encouraged, it was demanded. And the legacy? Without the Renaissance, we'd probably still be living in a world ruled by superstition, fear, and dogma, where the very idea of human potential was crushed under religious orthodoxy. Instead, this era laid the foundations for the modern world: democracy, science, art, and exploration. It was the dawn of a new age. So, next time you admire a painting, gaze up at the stars, or pick up a book, remember, they all owe a debt to those relentless Renaissance minds who dared to ask, what if?